Okay, so we were just talking about the collaboration you do and then the end product. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if you could get specific about some of the technology that you use to go from, your understanding of the software to that end product.
Yeah, sure. So it's actually really interesting because when I first started here 3.5 years ago, we were using completely different tools and completely different technology. And it's very interesting to see the way that my everyday process has changed since we started adopting newer technology. So back when I first started, we were delivering our content in the form of CHMs, so the kind of things that you might remember seeing back in like Microsoft Word 2000 or something like that.
Yeah.
If you ever clicked on the help button, you got this little thing with a bunch of little books on it. Yeah. Well, so it's changed a little bit now. We're now using a DITA architecture. So DITA stands for the Darwin Information Typing Architecture. And basically it's an XML data management system, kind of a content management system type. What's a good way to describe it? It's basically an architecture that allows you to define types of content and then output that content in different mechanisms. So you can use the same topic sourced in DITA, but output it as like a PDF, and it'll have a specific like structure specifically for that PDF output format. But we can also output it as like a guided help, like I mentioned earlier, and it'll be the exact same content, but it'll be presented in a very different way. But we can also output that as like online web documentation, and that'll look very different as well, but it'll all be the same content. It's just all structured differently for the different delivery mechanisms. And so we're moving toward that single sourcing content management system.
I had never heard of DITA. That's awesome. Let's see. So you're putting information into DITA and then utilizing its functions to spit out that same content in different forms.
Yeah.
Is there any other notable softwares or technologies that you use in any part of the process, whether it's in the communication in-house or in the actual writing of the...
Oh, those are good. Yeah, those are good points. So we also use a wiki, an online wiki, for internal documentation. So as like I said, we started to adopt these tools, these technologies fairly recently. And so a lot of what we do is also writing internal documentation that outlines our processes and things like that. And so we type that up in an internal wiki. Mm-hmm. We also use, email communication is an essential part of the job as well. So we use Outlook for all of our email communication and Skype for video conferencing. A lot of the time we do video conferencing because we have tech writers who work remotely, like in different cities or different states. Mm-hmm. And so we do video conferencing for meetings sometimes. We do communicate in person fairly often, really often. We have in-person meetings. We do, every day we have what we call stand-ups. And basically it's a very brief, like 15-minute meeting where everybody just gives an update on what they're working on that day and what they completed the day before. And let's see, other...
Any like Adobe software or?
So we do use Photoshop for a lot of like graphics or screenshots that we create. So we don't. We have a team, a design group who does like a lot of the fancier design stuff. Like they'll create a lot of the icons for functions in the software, or if we need icons for our projects that go along with the guided helps, they'll create those. But a lot of the time we take screenshots and then we ourselves will put like call outs or like highlight certain things in those screenshots and make it look nice, or we might create a flow chart or something like that to go along with the documentation. And so yeah, we'll use Photoshop for things like that. So in other groups, some people still use FrameMaker, Adobe FrameMaker, and that's more for print documentation. It basically allows you to create publications and edit them in more of like a bulk editing and creating like your own rules for your documentation, or like templates and things like that. I personally don't use FrameMaker on pretty much ever anymore. I think I used it a few times, 3 or so years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But we're all making that transition into DITA. And so specifically DITA, so DITA is like, it's not exactly the tool that we use. DITA is the framework that we use. The specific tools that we use to work in DITA are XMetal. It's an XML editor, and we use Live Content Publication Manager. And so that Publication Manager basically, it's our content management system. And so there's a repository of all of the content that we create. And anytime that we create a new topic or a new image or anything like that, that gets placed into the content management system, the repository. And from there, we can pull out all of the pieces that we want in a particular doc set. So for example, I have my own publication for the guided help that I mentioned earlier. And so I've pulled out all of the topics related to that piece. Obviously, I make sure that they flow together and all of that, but anyone else could go in and reuse that same topic somewhere else. An example of that is the online documentation that we have.
Mm-hmm.
I've pulled out a lot of the same topics and just reused them one-to-one in the online documentation as well. So.
Interesting. Yeah, it makes sense to, just have that kind of, that's primary source of information.
Yeah.
And then move it around.
Yeah, so one thing that's actually really interesting with this new technology is that it makes it a lot easier for us to spend time creating new content, because we don't have to spend a lot of time updating existing content. Because everything is single sourced, we can update it in that one place and it'll get updated in all of the delivery mechanisms. Rather than before, we were spending a lot of time making updates in multiple places. Now we can make that update one time, it goes out, we can spend more time writing new content, writing better content. Yeah.
And when did that change? I mean, you've been with NI almost 4 years, right? Mm-hmm. When do you think that changed to DITA, that like kind of that shift?
Yeah.
It's been really recent, I guess?
Yeah, so that, I think it's been in the works for a while. It was in the works probably even when I started, but we didn't start to use it very much. There might have been, it was a lot of people just researching and kind of testing things out at the beginning. But we really didn't start picking it up company-wide until about 2 years ago, I think. And that's when we really started to get